All of time and space. Everywhere and anywhere, every star that ever was. Where do you want to start?
We've watched all of season 1 of Doctor Who, and now we've got nowhere to go. I've checked the TARDIS, and we're nowhere, no time. I'm Iain.
And I'm Mark, and welcome to All of Time and Space.
Woo, woo. That's me, dude. You have to sort of make that sort of with echoing effects. You have to make me sound like an excited crowd.
Oh, okay.
Whoop
right.
and go, yeah, woo, yeah, okay, yeah. Like I'm a bunch of guys in the studio.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lovely. A posse.
So what are we going to do this week, mate? We've got no episode to talk about.
Well, I thought we could just kick back and relax a bit and just chill and maybe reflect on what our thoughts were of season 1.
That's a pretty good idea. If we haven't got to be in the usual TARDIS for this episode, could we maybe go down the pub?
Well, as we record this, it's possibly not the safest place you could go, is it really, the pub?
That's a very good point.
Or maybe we could decant to the 1970s and find a ye olde pub somewhere.
Oh, that would be wonderful. I know a very nice pub in Devil's End.
Oh, yeah?
Yes, it's called the Obverse Book.
Ah, yeah, I think I remember. I think I've been there once before, yeah.
I'm pretty sure Matt Barber was telling us about it.
Yeah, yeah, I think he did mention it once.
Okay, well, why don't you pilot us there and then we can have a good catch-up about season 1. Honestly, look at them all. You'd think they'd never seen a police box materialise in the middle of a fairly run-down, down-at-heel public house. While we're queuing up to get someone's attention, Mark, obviously, we've been doing this for quite a while now, and people will obviously know you from Nerdology and going back a long time, the Blue Box podcast. But
yes.
We've heard you talking a lot about Doctor Who and other things, but I thought it'd be nice if people got more of a feel for kind of, who you are underneath it all. So I was wondering what your kind of earliest memory of Doctor Who was.
Well, I am a child of the 70s and 80s, so I have very early memories. I've kind of like flashback images of Destiny of the Daleks.
Right.
And I also have sort of slightly dubious memories of City of Death as well, in which I invented scenes in my memory that didn't actually exist in the programme when I watched it back again all those years later on DVD. That's in my kind of era, so season 17 is very much my sweet spot.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
I used to have a sort of fairly nebulous idea that it was my first memory was somewhere in season 18, and then I narrowed it down to because for a long time I thought it might have been Keeper of Traken. And then I remembered a kind of nanosecond of Warrior's Gate. But then I had this very clear memory of being around my auntie's house for the end of part 1 of Full Circle. which until very recently I thought that was my first episode, or certainly my first memory. But
Yeah.
I remembered literally in the last 2 weeks. I can remember when they were showing the Five Faces of Doctor Who, and they were showing, I think, Logopolis again. And I remember thinking, and I can remember the thought, even though I would have been 4 or 5. I remember thinking, but shouldn't it be a kind of grey blue swirly tunnel thing for the end credits? Which means that I too must have been watching.
At least season 17. Yeah.
So,
I mean, the first story I really remember watching from beginning to end, which completely beguiled me and hooked me into it, was one of the all-time classics of the Doctor Who canon. It's The Horns of Nymon.
mate, I'm so sorry.
No, you don't need to be. It's a fantastic story.
I've watched it literally once in my. So I've been doing this ever since BritBox came along. I've been rewatching all of Doctor Who from the start of Tom Baker, and I very nearly stopped at the let's say at the 5th episode of the Caves of Androzani. I was very much ready to knock it all on the head, but I've persevered, and I'm now in the middle of Vengeance on Varos again.
Oh, right, okay.
I can't remember why I've started telling you this, probably because I need therapy, or perhaps we could do some sort of Kickstarter and people could send me money to have the horrible thoughts erased from my brain. But I think, I mean, I can remember watching it, in the Davison era, and I remember little kind of bits and bobs, but I'm not sure I can remember watching a whole story all the way through. I mean, I probably would have, just not found them very memorable. But probably it would have been something around the time of Androzani.
Yeah.
Possibly Planet of Fire, maybe. Because I was either not paying sufficient attention, or I was just a bit of an idiot.
Well, I mean, but from my own personal experience of being a child of that sort of age, it could be a little from column A and a little from column B.
Oh, I see. Oh, well, if we're going to turn it into a massive accounting scenario, then I'll bring out last year's taxes, and you can help me run through some of these dodgy expenses. I've claimed for a yacht, for God's sake.
So anyway, those are some of our earliest memories for Doctor Who. So let's just fast forward a bit to some of our more recent viewing. I thought it'd be nice to just go back through the stories we covered for season 1, and I've gone through our scores that we gave them, ourselves and our esteemed guests, and I've ranked them in the order that we scored them. And coming in 8th place, do you want to have a little guess as to what that story might be, young Iain?
One name does leap to mind. Could it possibly be the Greek philosopher Sensoritas?
You are correct. It's the Sensorites.
Oh.
So, yes. It came out with a grand total of, by the time you sort of add our 3 scores together and then divide them by 3, a grand total of 4 out of 10. So you gave it 3, I gave it 5, and Ben Schneider, who was our guest, gave it 4.
Well, there's always got to be a loser, hasn't there? And it was. It wasn't as hard going as I thought it might be, but it was bloody hard going.
No. I'd still watch any Doctor Who because I'm a sad fanboy, but it's not one I'm itching to get back to and watch again for fun.
No, I think this is very much one of the ones that it'll be nice at some point to be able to say I've seen all of Doctor Who, but I'll probably never need to revisit that story again. All I can really remember from that one now is that the baddie disguised himself by using a sash,
Yes.
because they all look the same, which is just this massively kind of racist sort of
Yeah.
thing. I imagine
And possibly also, betrays the generally low budget of the program, as much as that's their main way of moving the story on, is by moving a sash from one character to another.
Yeah, I mean, if he just put on like a sort of papier-mâché head of a slightly different looking Sensorite, that might have been a more sophisticated ruse. But never mind, that one came eighth.
Yeah, before we move on, did you have anything sort of vaguely positive to say about it?
I was very entertained by some of the performances in episode one. And
Yes.
I can't remember now what the gentleman's name was, either the character or the actor, but the guy left sort of manning the space station was in a very different production tonally to everyone else.
I thought it was one of Susan's better stories, which is, the bar is set relatively low there, let's be honest.
You're not wrong.
Yeah, I think it just gave her a little bit of that sort of mystery of her character back again, and her psychic abilities and that kind of malarkey. But yeah, it's I really am clutching at straws here to try and think of anything nice to say about it. I mean, the opening episode I thought was pretty good.
And
I thought it drove along nicely. I thought the tension was really ramping up, and then it kind of falls away from there, if I'm honest.
And I think it was a pretty good cliffhanger at the end of part one as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's all we've got, isn't it?
Yeah. That's not an awful lot you can say about the Sensorites that's vaguely positive, really. Let's be honest. Although we actually, that said, I do remember we had probably the most feedback from our beautiful listeners about the Sensorites than I think we did about any other story, and I think the majority of those were saying that they really loved it.
Well,
So
I think
it just goes to prove that
it's not. I literally can't get any further into that sentence because the words are kind of sticking in my craw. That it's not an. Wow, I've never experienced this before in all my years of podcasting. I literally can't talk. It's a difficult story to actually hate. There's nothing terrible about it. It's just a bit kind of silly and a bit ponderous, and as you said, a bit sort of cheap and mildly racist. When you and I don't want to go running off into the long grass, but by the time you're in the middle of what can only be described as the Eric Saywood era, there's a lot of stories which it's much more easy to dislike in a more visceral, powerful way, in a way that can lead you to punch your fist through the screen of your MacBook rather than endure any more of episode 5 of The Caves of Androzani.
that's something for the listeners to look forward to when we get to it.
Yeah.
All right, shall we move on to what came in at number 7?
Let's do that.
Do you want to have another guess to see?
So purely based on the fact that it's not all there, and by that rationale, and neither am I. But I'm going to guess the Reign of Terror.
Oh, you got it again. He's good.
This is great.
You have to remember, listener, that we recorded these episodes, the reviews, way back in, I want to say, the end of March, early April.
That sounds about
this
right.
Year. So we're now recording towards the end of September. So your powers of recall are pretty good, my friend.
It's all going to go wrong from here. But
Bob gave the story 6. Craig gave it 3. I gave it 4, and you gave it 5. So it ended up with 4.5 as the average.
Okay.
So it was very close to the Sensorites for the bottom.
Yeah,
so to speak.
Again, I think it was just kind of slow and ponderous, and I didn't see it, so I can't speak to how
No, you
cheap
read the
or
novel,
otherwise.
didn't you?
Yeah, I read the book. I read the book thinking it was a 4-part story, and thinking, "God, this is a bit full of incident for a Target book." But yeah, it read very well, and I think they managed to
Yeah.
crowbar in a lot more of the kind of scenery and sort of mise en scène of Paris in that era than perhaps was actually translated onto the screen.
Yeah, I mean, Hartnell does get to rock that crazy peacock hat. So, there's that. But yeah, I did find it a little bit of a... It's a shame, because up until that point, I felt like I was really, really enjoying... I thought I was going to sit down and say I really enjoyed all of Season 1, but that one... And I know a few people who love that story, and they feel that's their favourite story of the season, but I just... Maybe I just wasn't in the right headspace when I watched it, but I just found it a bit ponderous and a bit... Yeah. Didn't really do an awful lot for me.
And also, it was kind of, apart from episodes 1 and 6, it felt like a sort of 4-parter where everyone's just sitting around in jail waiting to get their head cut off, which is, I would say, a little gloomy.
Yeah, you could be right there. Yeah, I think William Russell had the right idea. He just went on holiday for a couple of weeks, didn't he?
Well, that wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. You can't trust him. Oh.
Has your opinion of Iain improved anymore since we've completed the first season, or are you still fairly nonplussed?
Something amusing. A couple of weeks ago, I went to stay in Cambridge for a couple of weeks. And for no real reason other than it seemed like a thing to do. And it wasn't until we got there that I discovered that my wife had booked us into an Airbnb on Chesterton Road. And at that
What are the
point,
chances of that?
I thought, well, hey, I'm Iain on Chesterton Road, and yeah, I immediately started dressing like a ponce and acting like an arrogant sexist pillock.
Did you try out the neck pinch?
Obviously
not on the wife, but
didn't work. I tried some of the sort of confused, hypnotized acting from Edge of Destruction, and people just laughed at me in the streets. No, I do. I still have I don't want to say antipathy, but I'm not as enamoured of Mr. Chesterton as I know most of our listeners and most people of sound mind are. I realise and appreciate he's a very popular character. He just rubs me up the wrong way. But I'm sure that will be softened as we move into Series 2, and he probably, hopefully, will be less abrasive.
Well, let's hope. Let's hope so.
Yes.
So, shall we move on to what came in 6th place? This is going to get a bit more tricky now because the scores start to go up a bit, so it's a bit harder to try and pick out.
I'm also hampered by the fact that I can't remember all of them. So I think in 6th place, I think it's going to be the Edge of Destruction.
I'm afraid you're wrong there, young Iain. It was the Aztecs.
No way.
Yeah, because
I just remembered
that's
that
quite
one.
surprising.
I remembered that one,
Now,
and I thought that's going to be top 3.
Now, here's the thing, Iain.
Okay.
You gave it a 7.
Right.
I gave it a 7.
Right.
And Lindsay, our guest, gave it a 5. And that brought the score down. So,
is it?
Yeah.
Can we get that decision overturned?
Well, you know what the Scots are like. They're quite. They're not really very averse to changing their minds, are they?
Well, let's hope they they stick to their guns at the moment and break away from the UK, because then we could have some fun.
God, yeah, if they've got any sense, they
If
will.
they've got any sense, yeah.
Yeah.
No,
I
that was a
rather
very
enjoyed this
entertaining
one.
episode, actually. I enjoyed talking to Lindsay quite a lot.
Yeah, she's fantastic.
But I do think this was a very strong story. It's possibly, and I can't really remember now her reasons for marking it so kind of, averagely, but it, I think just because maybe it didn't have aliens or monsters in it, and it was quite a kind of 2 or 3 sets, historical, one exceptional performance, and a lot of homoerotic wrestling sequences, and maybe that just didn't do it for her. I don't know.
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, she wasn't overly enamoured with the First Doctor from this story, because she hasn't seen very much of 62 at all. I think she's seen An Unearthly Child of the William Hartnell stuff, and I think this was her first exposure to anything else. So whether she had sort of preconceived ideas of what the Doctor should be like, and maybe that possibly coloured her score, I don't know.
Well, I mean, that's quite a controversial result. That's a bit like when Pierre Gasly won the Italian Grand Prix at Monza, which will mean nothing to you, but let me tell you, 2 weeks ago I was jumping up and down in the living room like a giddy fool.
I shall insert some cricket noises right now. Not Leather on Willow, but, little insects, yeah.
I remember that episode of Buffy very fondly.
So, we're up to 5th now.
Right, this is where I'm
care to take a
struggling,
gamble?
because there is one story... No, hang on, no. Yeah, no, there is still one story that I can't remember. But this one surely must have been Edge of Destruction.
You're correct, yes. So, Matt Barber was our guest for that episode. He gave it 7, you gave it 7, I gave it a 6. I was slightly less enamoured. So, yeah, it was very close between that and the Aztecs. So, the Aztecs ended up with 6.3, and the Edge of Destruction came out at 6.6 out of 10.
Wow.
So, there wasn't much in it.
The margins are very narrow.
I think he talked us round quite a lot on that episode, because I think going into it, I felt it was a bit of a non-story as such, but then he very eloquently went on to tell us all the reasons why it's such a keystone to that early part of the show, and what it sets out and what it establishes for the rest of the continuity. And I think he kind of won us round. Well, certainly won me
I think
round.
you're right. I think he sort of, as you say, unpacked this very carefully reasoned argument as to what it innovated and what it kind of set in stone, and we just sort of went yeah. That's pretty much what I remember. There was nothing wrong with it, but it was a bit slightly, for a very cheap story that was kind of filmed in the only standing set they had, it still managed to be quite beyond their ability to realise it. I'm thinking of things like the melting clock. And yeah, it maybe was perhaps the most insubstantial of the things.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily hang together particularly well as a story in its own right, but just in terms of what it sets up and the significance of establishing the TARDIS as a sort of sentient force of some kind, and all these other things that kind of get woven into the continuity. I think that's what really lifts it up.
I can remember, I think Matt described the TARDIS as a safe space. Now you tell that to Colin Baker when he's banging his head on the console and regenerating. If anything, that's a clear breach of Gallifreyan health and safety.
I was going to say, try selling that to Perry when he's trying to throttle her around the neck.
I don't know why I laughed at that. That was appalling.
You're an evil man, that's why.
Can we edit that out? I feel bad now. I blame Saywood.
Yeah.
But I don't want to come
that's
over all
fairly
J.R.
safe.
Southall.
Oh, God. Well, there's an image I don't want. Anyway. Moving on to fourth place.
Fourth place,
Now
right?
it's gonna get quite tricky now.
I surely, with the best will in the world and with the best episode in the world, surely it's still got to be An Unearthly Child.
Oh, you're too good at this. Have you been having a sneaky look? Because I've been
Take
keeping
that horse back to
these
the
results
paddock and
a
give him a
secret from
kiss.
Ian.
Oh,
So I didn't let you in on what the scores were. I did say
No.
there were one or two little surprises, but yeah, very good. So Matt Barber was again our guest for that one. So Matt gave it an 8. You gave it a 6. How dare you? And I gave it an 8. So that came out at 7.3 as an average.
well, I stand by my numerical reasoning. It was clearly a 6 out of 10 story. It was all about part 1.
Yeah.
For me, I appreciate parts 2, 3, and 4 did tell a very good story, and actually, I do have a serious point I could make at this time. But I've never really kind of moved on from when I first saw that story as a kid and just found it quite dull. But do you want my serious point?
Go on.
All
Let's have
right.
it.
So when I started watching Doctor Who, as we talked about earlier, you know, I was kind of a child of the Davison era, and
Yeah.
that period of, you know, that time was kind of became the template in my brain for what good Doctor Who was, and that's what you judged all other Doctor Who against.
Yeah.
And that was what I thought a TARDIS crew should be like. And it's only on this recent rewatch that I've realised that it was just terrible, because you had Nissa Tegan and Adric, who came from these 3 wildly different backgrounds with wildly different cultural experiences and socio-political issues and experiences, and
But
they
luckily, they all get on like a house on fire.
they
And they never argue
spoke
with each other.
to each
So
other about it. There was no sense that they were real people. They were just the shouty one, the boring one, and the sort of crap one in the wig who had a badge for mathematical excellence. And it was when we watched Unearthly Child, and in the space of that kind of 3-part story in the Cave of Skulls, where they go through this kind of psychological horror, and
they go through the mill, don't they?
they go through the mill. There's a degree of factionalism with the Doctor and Susan kind of opposing them initially, Ian and Barbara, but then they all kind of cohere and start working together, and by the end of it they are 4 very clearly defined characters in their own right, and that's what goes on to make the series such a success. And that is what is fundamentally missing from the TARDIS crew when I was watching it as a child, which is that they were not characters, they were just paper thin ciphers. And I'm going to be honest, I'm going to blame Eric Saywood.
I feel a theme developing here. Now, if you'd said to me before recording, what do you think is going to be the running theme? I would have suggested maybe, you know, for our conversation, I would have suggested maybe, you know, Susan is not very well served, or, you know, the Doctor softens after being quite irascible to begin with. But no, it turns out it's Eric Saywood.
Well, what I'm doing is I'm using examples of the show from a good sort of 20 years before he was materially involved in it to underpin my own personal dissatisfaction with rewatching episodes of a children's television show which are nearly 40 years old now. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But at the same time, I'm suitably chastened, and I will shut up about Eric Saywood. What did you make of The Unearthly Child?
Well, I wanted to really give the latter part of the story a little bit more of a fair go this time round, but I still feel like my opinion, and it's not one of an outlier, is that the first episode is absolutely stunning, and the ones that come after are not as good.
I think
It's interesting in terms of just watching it back as a piece of TV to see how the show would have been made back then, and so from a sort of archaeological standpoint, it's quite interesting to watch.
Yeah.
But as entertainment, really, I could watch the first episode and then skip past it and go on to the Daleks.
Let me ask you a question. So, could anything have come after that first episode and been as good and held your attention, or was did they have to make it kind of a lower key kind of story?
I can't remember who it was now, whether it was you or Matt had made a point of saying that they needed a slower paced story.
I think it was me.
They needed a slower paced story just to sort of give the characters a chance to breathe before heading into the Daleks, because that would have been a bit too much and a bit too crazy. And I think there is definitely something to be said for that, but it's not really changed my opinion of those cavemen episodes, unfortunately.
I mean, they were probably good for the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're basically, the way to look at it is there are some magnificent stories in this season of Doctor Who, and so they had to finish higher than An Unearthly Child, which was merely 25% brilliant.
Yeah.
So it's,
and that's one of the great things about this.
Yeah,
that's one of the great things about this season as well, is the variety of stories. I think that's something quite interesting.
It really does feel, like in some respects, quite sort of dramatically thrown together, and we'll have a bit of this, and then we'll go over here, and we'll have a historical, and then we'll have space aliens in the future, and then we'll have another historical, and then we'll, it's like it was kind of lashed together without any kind of real overarching kind of thought.
I must say, I'm very envious of anyone who's joined us on this who's not seen the classic series at all, because I imagine it is quite a thrill to just watch each successive story and wondering what on earth's going to come next.
Absolutely. Yeah. I can't think of anyone, or I'd get them in as some sort of test subject. But that would be
Well, if you're listening to this and you have decided to give it a go, then get in touch with us.
If you're listening to a podcast where two sort of, I'm not going to say middle-aged, but two certainly over-the-hill men mumble on about Doctor Who, and you've never watched Doctor Who, but you've stuck with us for 8 or 9 episodes, and you'd like to watch all of Doctor Who under laboratory conditions with me standing next to you with electrodes, and please get in touch. You can email us at mailbag@rassalon.com.
I think the advent of BritBox has really made it a lot more accessible, and whereas before you'd have to fork out a fair old whack of money to acquire all the DVDs in one form or another, you can now, if you're subscribing to that service, just dip straight in.
Sorry, I've gone ping. Let me just turn that off. Sorry, yes. I'll tell you something that's either very funny or very sad. I went to HMV earlier on today. I had to go and buy some vinyl. It was good. It was a good record. And on the way out, I noticed it was actually. They've just brought out the Guns N' Roses greatest hits on vinyl. Didn't need it. Got it all already. Bought it anyway. Idiot. And on the way out, I noticed they had they have all those walls of DVDs. Like we used to have at MVC 20 years ago, but not as good.
Yeah.
And one of them was classic Doctor Who, two for a tenner. And I thought, well, they're normally £6, so this is good. And I went and looked at them and thought, do I need any of these? And I was looking at it for about 3 or 4 minutes, and I thought, you've got BritBox. You can watch all of these stories right now on your MacBook right now. You don't need to buy any. But you're always going to be kind of attracted to the lovely cases.
I
and they're
think
sharp, aren't they?
that is a very common thing amongst Doctor Who fans. They are collectors and they do like to have books or DVDs or Blu-rays or action figures sat on their shelves, and they like to acquire them, and I am very much one of those people.
I'll tell you what's interesting though, and I've gone. I say very interesting. It might be completely boring and utterly banal, but I've collected the Target books, the action figures, the DVD box sets and things, but I've never been a completist. I've always been happy to have a bit. Like with the Target books, I want to say I had maybe 80 or 90 of them. I haven't even got all of the Doctors in terms of action figures. I've got about half of them, and I don't feel that kind of shortness of breath at the thought that I've got an incomplete collection anymore. I always intended to, but I don't know if that means I've grown up or I'm just not a good enough fan. What about you? Have you got everything?
Certainly DVD wise, I think I collected all of the ones that were out, and I am now acquiring the Blu-rays because that's kind of my wheelhouse. I am a DVD Blu-ray nerd. I did go a bit crazy on the action figures when they first started coming out, because when I was a kid, you had Star Wars figures and all that kind of stuff, and that was great.
Yep.
But I longed for Doctor Who figures.
Me too.
And the nearest we had was a sort of Dennis Fisher action dolly.
The 12-inch Tom Baker.
Yeah, you were.
With the face of Mark Ormond.
Yeah. So yeah, I did go a little bit crazy on those when they first started coming out, but yes, my need to have those has been well and truly sated many, many, many years ago.
Well, now let's drill down into that. Did you go as crazy as to buy the action figure of Cassandra, where it was just the frame and there was no Cassandra?
No, I was not tempted by that one, I have to say.
That, to me, that was a low point.
Well, I think it's an ingenious way of just getting a bit more mileage out of a figure that you've already released once before.
Let me ask you another question. When we were kids and we were playing with Star Wars figures, did you ever, and not just Star Wars figures, but there were loads of other kind of toy franchises. Did you ever play Doctor Who using different figures?
Of course,
and which figures did you make the Doctor?
Oh, goodness. I can't remember now.
Right. I mean,
Ben Kenobi's a fairly obvious one, isn't he? Because he's sort of, a bit cloaky and a bit beardy.
Yep.
A bit old.
Do you remember there was a Han Solo from Endor who had a big, long sort of military coat?
Oh, yeah.
He was one of my Doctors.
Oh, well, there you go.
Also, the Dr. Octopus from the Secret Wars action figure range, when his little metal arms fell off, I made him a little kind of Uncle Sam hat and a coat made out of the cloth from my sister's My Little Pony show stable, which to this day she doesn't know that I stole that and sewed it into a very rudimentary jacket.
She does now. I'm sure she'll be tuned into this.
Oh, she better not. She thinks I died 3 years ago in a yachting accident. It's fine. And there were loads of others. I remember whatever I got and whatever I was into, I'd always end up making a Doctor Who, make a little TARDIS that would fit that figure. And then the Dapol figures came out just as I was, months
just
after I was past that point where you can get away.
Lego was another outlet for me. I found I could create all sorts of things with Lego, and that was quite a good way of getting my Doctor Who play fix.
Excellent.
But as I think I did start saying at one point, because BritBox is now around, if anyone's just decided, well, actually I like the new series, I kind of fancy trying the old series, and they want to view along with us, then it's there and it's easily accessible. So yeah, if you've dipped your toe into the water for the first time, let us know. We'd really love to hear from you. So moving on, we're up to third place now. This is really starting to get a bit more tricky. You've got 3 stories left.
it is tricky because I'll tell you why. Because we've clearly got the Daleks, we've got Marco Polo, and we've got another story that I've forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
Oh no! Because we had Jim with us talking about the Keys of Marinus.
We did.
Surely to God, that thing can't have come in the top two. So I'm going to guess
the Keys of Marinus is in third place. Now, I think there's a lot of people who would be quite surprised at that coming in the top three. So you gave it 7.5, Jim gave it 8.5, and I gave it 7. So yeah, just snuck ahead of an Unearthly Child there by 0.3 of a point. I think it's a fun story. I don't think I remember saying at the time, it's a bit of a Marmite story, but I love it. I think it's, obviously it's very much of its time. The budget is non-existent, but the sheer ambition of it, I think, is enough to carry me along. I really enjoyed it.
I agree with you 100%. I remember I remember it was one of the most fun episodes just to talk about it and not mock it, but find much that was entertaining in its deeply nuanced performances. There were some fairly innovative effects. I remember they all had to go and stand in front of a black wall so they could do the little Dobbin jump.
Well, we didn't have CSO at this point, so
No, and it was, as you said, it was so ambitious to do, a completely different, sort of set and location for every episode, and to make it that much more of an ongoing thing. It was, and okay, some of it was lamentable. But things like the spikes that were being lowered onto Barbara looked like an old bent coat hanger, and there's that I can't even remember now. And there was the guy in the little dress, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He had this slightly gropey statue as well. And
yeah, that's right. And
these are all quite risible, but I just think it's a whole bundle of fun.
Yeah, it is.
And I really enjoyed it.
It's the second best story that Terry Nation wrote in that opening salvo of stories, and it was entertaining stuff. It was a fun bit of sci-fi. It made a very nice, welcome and refreshing change from all the historical stuff that was going on. So I think, I don't know that it really deserves to be in third place, but if it is, it's there because people love it rather than because it's any good.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And now we come to second place, and I think this is possibly the one that would have surprised a lot of people coming into this if you just were given the list of stories before we'd had a chance to talk about them, and you had to try and guess where the stories would have been ranked. I don't think this one would have been too many people's best guess at second place. It's, of course, Marco Polo.
Oh, no way! I was going to guess the Daleks. Oh, my God.
Well, there we go. It's Marco Polo. Wow. So, David gave it 10 points.
He did.
And you and I both gave it 9 points.
And we were right to do so, because I think it's a wonderful story.
It is. I think it's just something different from what we've had before. It's a historical. It's 7 parts, but it just chugs along at quite a pace. You never feel like you're just, treading water, waiting for the next episode to come on. There's always something happening. I know the way stations are, effectively being redressed each week, but it just feels different enough that, a bit like Keys of Marinus, actually, you've got that just a bit of interest, and the intrigue that goes on, and you've got a really cool villain who's, you know, quite suave, and you wonder what he's going to get up to next. And there's the whole thing with Marco Polo. Is he going to side with the bad guys, or is he going to eventually turn around and help the Doctor? And yeah, it's all these really great things. And I think the cast is fantastic. From what we can see from the photos, it looks very sumptuous. All the costumes look amazing. The sets look really good. It was just a lot of fun. And I feel like this was this a bit of a revelation to you at the time?
It was. I'm thinking that a tiny part of its success might be the sheer quality of the reconstruction that you and I watched for this one, and presumably David as well. It's not like they've got the tapes of it down in Australia, or do they? So it was a sort of midpoint between being an ordinary story that you can watch and a bunch of missing episodes, because it didn't feel too jarring because it was so well made. And I think I might have given it a lower mark had it been slightly less of a satisfying watch or listen, or both.
Yeah. Experience.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I do like an experience. But yeah, I just think it was in a time when stories could go on for quite a long time and outstay their welcome really quite easily. I think Marco Polo was a very early outlier by not in any way outstaying its welcome. The history was, you weren't being beaten over the head with it in a particularly dull way. You didn't get Barbara holding forth on, oh, well, I know all about Marco Polo. But now, if Ian Chesterton had been the history teacher, God, imagine his little homilies every 5 minutes.
They did shoehorn in a little bit of educational stuff.
There was a bit of science, wasn't there? There was, we can drink water by licking the walls or something. It's like, yes, Ian, after you, whatever. Yeah, and and there was that kind of what was becoming a trope where they land and then within 30 seconds something has befallen them, which means they can't get back into the TARDIS. I think in this, I can't even remember. Was it chewing gum in the lock, or did someone hang a wolf over the door? Or it was one of those.
I can't remember.
But yeah, I
think David said at the time the only thing he could really pick fault with was where they're all set to go, and then Susan says, I must say goodbye to Ping Cho before we leave, and then of course it then extends the story for another couple of episodes again.
I mean, you'd be cross.
That's really nitpicking,
cross, wouldn't you? It's like if you're ever at a supermarket and you're desperate to get home because you want to beat the traffic and you want to watch Match of the Day, and then your wife says, I've just got to pop back in and thank Ping Cho. You're like, oh, this is going to go south. I'm off. You're on your own, love.
No, I really enjoyed it. It was. I'm just so pleased that you liked it so much, because I didn't honestly know how that was going to pan out. I knew David was going to love it because he's such a massive Hartnell fan. But I'm really pleased that you got something out of it.
And I'm sort of smothering a yawn there in a sort of David Tennant kind of way. I am very pleased that I finally had a reason to watch some of these stories, and certainly Marco Polo is the kind of biggest surprise for me. I going into this, I thought I'd probably enjoy to a greater or lesser extent a few of the stories, and I thought I'd find most of them would be really quite hard work, and that totally hasn't been the case at all. They've all been very entertaining, irrespective of how cheap or illogical they are, and often that can actually be a huge boon. Keys of Marinus. But yeah, I think Marco Polo is, for me, when I'm thinking about that season of Paul McGann Doctor Who they were talking about, where they were going to remake some of the old stories with him, I'm thinking, imagine if they'd done that with Marco Polo. Wouldn't that have been?
Yeah, with the sort of budget they had to work with as well.
Wouldn't that have been amazing? Yeah. Oh.
What could have been?
So, on the subject of what could have been, what could have been number one then, Mark?
Well, I think there's only one story left, Ian. So, unless there's been a massive mistake somewhere in my workings out, it's the Daleks.
And
it beat Marco Polo by 0.2 of a point.
That is insane.
So Nick Pegg gave it 10. You gave it 9.5, and I think that's just what tipped it over the edge. And I gave it 9.
Oh, wow. So remind me about these Daleks then, because I'm not entirely sure I can really cast my mind back that far.
I think we both possibly had issues with the one episode where everyone's jumping over a very small gap in the cliff face in terms of padding. But other than that, I think we all thoroughly enjoyed it. I mean, I know Nick is a huge fan of Doctor Who, but of course with his Dalek connections, he knows his stuff about this story. But yeah, I think it's the reason really why we're sat here 50 odd years plus afterwards talking about this show, because it just really swept people up and really got into kids' imaginations, and I think from that point on it cemented its place.
I think so, absolutely. I mean, there is a very sort of deep glee in fandom in ripping apart Terry Nation and saying that he'd write one page of foolscap and that would be his contribution to the stories that bore his name. But in 1963 that probably wasn't the case, and he probably didn't have that kind of power. He would have had to sit down and write 7 full scripts for this story, and as you say, they were the 7 scripts that kind of carried the show from being a very well produced but slightly up and down, it could go on to be a hit kind of show.
Yeah.
And
I think the other half of that equation is Raymond Cusick's design, because no matter how good the story was, if the design of those Daleks hadn't been as iconic as he made them, I don't think it would have taken off in the same way.
Had it been, for example, the Vord, if it had been men in PVC outfits, you're right. I don't think that's the sort of thing that would leap into the subconscious of every 7-year-old in 1963. And so as much as we want, or as much as I instinctively want to big up Terry Nation for this story, you are right in that probably 95% of the reason for the enduring legacy, not only of this story but also of Doctor Who, is the physical realisation of the Daleks, and that does go to the forgotten genius of Ray.
And of course, the work that went into developing the voice as well, because that's such a massive part of what makes them. It's such there are so many people who sort of contributed, and for varying rewards. I mean, Terry Nation got his name in the credits, and he got the glory, and he ultimately went on to make Blake 7 as a sort of reward. Ray Cusick, I believe, got £50 for designing the Daleks. Yeah.
The Zippy from Rainbow with his ring modulator, did he get any? He got nothing. He got to be in Rainbow.
He got to be in Rainbow.
Yeah. I'll ask Jeffrey.
I'd say that's reward in itself.
I know a pink hippopotamus that would disagree with you there.
No, I think I was just looking at some of the documentaries. I seem to remember at the time they were all kind of finding their way. They were talking about how they came up with the voice for the Daleks, and they're sat there sort of laughing about it now, thinking, people now see it as this, but we didn't have a clue really what they were going to sound like. You know, we had this ring modulator and we tried various things and we settled on this voice, which ended up being such a huge part of what makes them work.
So I'm going to try and formulate a sentence here, so bear with me. But the success of this story is a sort of massive confluence and coincidence where you have kind of 4 or 5 elements that really made something electrifying. You had obviously the script, you had the design, you had the sound production, you had the fact of JFK being shot while they were recording a scene where they're all supposed to be disorientated and scared. You had so many things, and if just one of them hadn't worked, this really wouldn't have been the production that it was. And as I think we kind of uncovered at the time we were talking about it, that's true of the series as a whole. You've got Verity Lambert's production, you've got the direction of, you know, Waris Hussein and others. You've got the performances, you've got the design of things like the TARDIS. And again, if any one of those things hadn't quite been where it needed to be, the whole thing falls apart like a long forgotten, ill-conceived 60s fantasy show. So, you know, everything that we think about season 1 of Doctor Who, we can also say about this story, The Daleks, which is that somehow, despite all the odds, and thanks to no one person's vision, but by a sort of bizarre example of a committee producing something wonderful, we've got this amazing piece of televisual art.
Oh, I think you summed that up very well.
Thanks, mate. I took a bit of a run up there, but that was one of my good sentences. I didn't even say bollocks, which is quite good.
And we've had some feedback from our listeners as well.
I've got mail.
I have got quite a long missive from one of our former guests, Ben Schneider.
Oh, I love Ben. Ben was great.
He is a flipping legend. So Ben writes, when I think of William Hartnell, I always think of his crappy imitators. Richard Herndl from The Five Doctors. David Bradley from Twice Upon a Time. That floating wax head thing from Dimensions in Time. In my opinion, those performances fail. They all present a First Doctor character as defined by JNT's 1980s press releases. Or even worse, they imitate a sort of First Doctor persona that people swear they remember seeing on TV. A First Doctor character they retrieve from half memories that have become polluted and diluted with fan debate and fan revision over 50 plus years. So, nah, they never really truly reach what made the First Doctor so special. To truly appreciate the subtleties in William Hartnell's character development, you have to do what Mark and Iain are doing, go back to the beginning, episode 1, and watch the progression. It's fascinating. In the first season, William Hartnell's Doctor is a monster, a terror. You can see this character fitting in seamlessly with the Time Lords we will meet later in The Deadly Assassin. A non-stop parade of aging old men, every single one of them with white hair. Every single one pompous, overbearing, full of snobbish intelligence, easily offended, and easily ancient. This is the culture, these are the values, this is the society that produced the character of the Doctor we see in An Unearthly Child. Gallifrey was a lifestyle, a way of thinking I doubt you can just give up on and run away from easily. It had to be a struggle. Looking back through 50 years of stories and knowing what will come later in the canon, it's interesting to see how this whole first season is in many ways all about the struggle of the Doctor to break from and rewrite the cultural programming he grew up with on Gallifrey. The Doctor took the first brave step himself, actually convincing himself to leave his home. But while he physically left his planet, he still carried the arrogant attitudes and the intellectual prejudices of Gallifrey with him. And it's Iain and Barbara who struggle to help him let go and become more, well, human. And he does. It takes an entire season, but you see it happen. You see the Doctor's fight, his resistance. You see the Doctor emotionally grow and slowly, ever so slowly, break from his Gallifrey cultural bias. It's wonderful to behold. I'll admit that the first season William Hartnell is not my favourite performance. My Billy love kicks in the moment he kicks Susan out of the TARDIS. Sure, he frees Susan to grow up on her own, but maybe it was also symbolic to the Doctor on a personal level. Gallifrey is now truly in his rearview mirror, assuming the TARDIS has a rearview mirror. From the Vicky episodes onward, the First Doctor seems to breathe easier, enjoy his life, enjoy his companions, and find his smile. But that's still to come in this podcast. Mark and Iain will tell you all about it. Love, Ben Schneider. Oh, thank you, Ben. That was amazing.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. See, he summed that up so perfectly, whereas we've been waffling on for the last hour or so and just not even come anywhere close to that.
Should we edit this and pretend that we said that? We'll just re-record everything. We'll just have that.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah.
And actually these as well, which... shall I read mine now?
Yeah, go on then.
Okay, so this wasn't written to us by Ham-Fisted Bat Vendor. This is me. I thought of this. These are my words, not those of Ham-Fisted Bat Vendor. Many of the stories are old friends by this stage. Well, ever since the launch of UK Gold. But familiarity hasn't blunted their impact on rewatching. Considered in its entirety an absolute triumph of production, frequently transcending the limited resources of the era. I mean, absolutely, you can't argue with that. That's if anything, that's even more concise than what Ben said.
Yeah.
So ideally, we're just going to.
Well done, Iain. That's really intelligent of you to come out with those points.
I did say that.
If only Ham-Fisted Bat Vendor could come up with something as articulate as that.
Yeah, right. I know.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Right now Jeff Goddard has written another, I would say, little mini essay. I've got no idea what part of the world he's from. I don't know what accent to do. I don't know.
He's from the Midlands in England.
Yeah, I can't really do Midlands. That's like no, I can't do that.
Have you heard any of my attempts to do accents when we've been doing our quiz?
Oh, I thought you were doing an impression of some sort of idiot.
Oh no, that's for the rest of the podcast.
Right. So no, Middle England. I can do an impression of either late 80s and early 90s racing driver Nigel Mansell or Paul, who I went to university with. So I'm just going to.
Paul. He's my favourite.
Paul. I'm not going to read it out in the style of Paul. That would be quite solipsistic. But Jeff Goddard says, to obviously the question, what did you think of season 1? He says, okay, I'll try and be brief. Spoilers, he fails. There's loads of this. The first season of Doctor Who is an absolute joy to me. It has a purity and an innocence to it that makes for real comfort viewing. I find it almost impossible to watch without thinking of the weight of all the years that follow. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. But seeing the show in such an embryonic form, yet it's still having a clarity of vision and purpose that often far outstretched its actual abilities, is fascinating. This is television pushing boundaries and stretching budgets like never before. We get consistency in the storytelling, we get consistency in the characters and performances, mostly, but we can forgive the odd aberration. Or can we? And we see 4 disparate souls form bonds and investigate what it is to be human. It not only holds up as what can now be considered historical television making, but as the firmest of foundations for all that follows. Oh, he finishes, and Hartnell is the boss.
He certainly is. At this point.
Well, he's the original and best number 1. I mean, it's hard to imagine anyone else could ever play the part.
That's brilliant. Thank you guys so much for writing in. You expressed everything so much better than we could.
Yeah, that's quite annoying, isn't it? If you could if you could crowbar in a few ums and ers and a few inarticulate waffly bits and a
Yeah.
tangent about toys from the 80s, and then if you can sort of link everything back to Eric Saywood, that would obviously make your ill-conceived, witless contributions that much more purposeful and excellent. So thank you so much. And don't forget, you could also send us some audio feedback. There's a number of ways. I mean,
That's
you can
right,
just
yeah.
put an MP3 in an envelope and post it to us, or Mark, you know,
You can.
something
We've even got a little
technical you
button
can
on our website. If you go to anchor.fm/all of time and space, there is a little button on our desktop there. Just click on that. It says message, and you can leave up to 60 seconds of feedback, or if you've got a bit more to say, as Iain says, just whack us an MP3, and we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, it would be nice to feel. I mean, we do feel it, that there is a fan base for this, and there are people on this journey with us, and we're going to approach this very much as a team, and we're going to delegate some of the heavy lifting to you. So if there's like a really awful story coming up, we'll get someone from out there to come here and talk about it, and we can stay in this pub.
So, have you got anything else you want to have a little chat about before we wrap things up?
No, I mean, this is the part of the show where I should normally say something like I've been reading this, or I've been watching that, or I've been doing this, but I haven't been doing anything. I've been watching Dead to Me on Netflix because my wife recommended it, and that's been very good. I've read a couple of books, but nothing amazing. And yeah, I've got nothing.
I have been revisiting season 5 and 6 of The Avengers.
Oh,
Because I picked those up on Blu-ray for not too much money recently, and it's absolutely stunning to watch. The quality of the Blu-ray transfer is brilliant. They were filmed on 35mm colour film, in black and white in the case of season 5, and it's incredible. They look like they were made yesterday, and this was before Diana Riggs very sadly passed away, and they are brilliant. There are some great stories in there, and it really is like a case of spot the Doctor Who actor, because there's so many brilliant cameos and guest appearances. So yeah, if you're into retro TV and 60 TV, definitely check out The Avengers, because that's brilliant.
well, we'll have to do a podcast about that next.
Well, I mean, we did do one on the Nerdology feed. If you go to Nerdology UK, I think it's episode 8, if I remember rightly. We're going back quite a few years. Yeah, we had a chat about The Avengers, and yeah, it's a great show.
That's a very deep cut. Can you remember who you did that episode with?
That was with Bill Linus.
Ah, excellent. Well, we'll have to. Well, I say we. I'll have a listen to that. I only listened to the Nerdologies that I'm in, frankly.
That sounds about right.
That's not true. that would be monstrous. But I do only listen to the ones where I know the subject matter. So,
Yeah.
like Buffy or Nintendo or stuff. If it's a show or a film that I didn't watch, I always have this thing that I don't want to come to something secondhand. If I'm gonna one day sit down and watch a show that everyone
I
tells
wonder
me
whether
I should watch,
it might be. I take it The Avengers isn't on BritBox, because I don't watch BritBox. But
I've not looked really. I've got Inspector Morse, I've got Doctor Who, and that's the only two things I've got on the go at the moment.
Yeah. No, it's well worth checking out. If you love Doctor Who, it's very much in that sort of wheelhouse, sort of fantastical, incredibly fun, and a lot more complex than I think a lot of people give it credit for. Yeah, it's definitely worth a watch.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll have a poke around and see what I can find.
Good, you do that.
In the meantime, then, and we've been dragging this out, but it really is your round now. So you should go to the bar.
I've made it last quite a long time, haven't I?
Well,
I am a bit of a lightweight when it comes to drinking.
I ran out of beer after about 10 minutes. I've been sitting here like I feel like the set of Marco Polo. It's just an arid desert and there's someone taunting me with water across the bar that he's just pouring down the sink. But I'm dying of thirst. What are we going to talk about next time, Mark?
Yeah, so coming up next, we have got Planet of Giants, which is the first story from season 2.
Whoa.
Yes, exciting. So it just leaves us to say thank you very much again for listening. And until next time, I was Mark.
And I was Ian.
If you'd like to get in touch, you can email us at mailbagofrassilon@gmail.com. We're also on Twitter @TimeEndSpacePod, and you can also find us on Facebook. If you want to leave some audio feedback, there is a link in the show notes. You can use your phone or your computer and leave up to 60 seconds of feedback, or if you're listening via the Anchor website, you can click on the message button and leave your audio. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you to Momo Tempo for providing our theme music.